In the crimson depths of Cedar Canyon, where ancient spirits whispered through stone corridors older than memory itself, Rebecca Martinez clutched her swollen belly as another contraction tore through her body like lightning across a desert sky. The wedding dress that should have been her joy now clung to her skin, stained with dust and tears, a cruel reminder of promises broken and trust shattered. She never imagined that her wedding day would end with her abandoned in sacred place, alone except for the child fighting to enter a world that had already shown its cruelty. What happened next would test everything she believed about human kindness, ancient wisdom, and the power of unexpected miracles in the most desperate of hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted Cedar Canyon in shades of gold and amber, its rays filtering through the massive stone formations that had stood sentinel over this sacred land for countless generations. Rebecca had always found peace in this place, even as a child, when her grandmother would bring her here to collect herbs and listen to the old stories. The canyon held memories like water holds light, reflecting them back in unexpected moments. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be the beginning of her new life with David. She stood at the edge of the ceremonial clearing, her hands smoothing the flowing fabric of her grandmother's wedding dress, the same dress that had been worn by 3 generations of women in her family. The delicate lace caught the morning breeze, and for a moment, she felt connected to all those who had come before her, all those who had stood in this very spot and made promises to love and cherish another soul. The canyon walls rose around them like a natural cathedral, their red stone surfaces carved by wind and water into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, as if the earth itself had been preparing for this moment. David moved beside her, his nervous energy palpable in the crisp morning air. He had insisted on having their ceremony here, in this remote corner of the Navajo Nation where Rebecca's grandmother had once served as a traditional healer. It was romantic, he had said, to be married where her ancestors had walked, where the old ways still held meaning. Rebecca had been touched by his thoughtfulness, believing it showed how deeply he understood her connection to this land and its traditions. The wedding party was small, intimate. David's brother Marcus served as best man, while Rebecca's college friend Jennifer had driven all the way from Phoenix to be her maid of honor. A handful of close friends and family members formed a loose circle around them, their faces glowing with happiness and anticipation. The ceremony was being performed by Robert Flying Eagle, an elder from the nearby community who had known Rebecca's grandmother and had agreed to blend traditional Navajo elements with the Christian service Rebecca and David had requested. Everything seemed perfect as Robert began the ceremony, his weathered voice carrying across the canyon with the authority of someone who had witnessed countless unions, both blessed and cursed. He spoke of the sacred nature of marriage, of 2 souls becoming one while remaining distinct, like the twin spires of rock that flanked the ceremonial space. His words seemed to echo off the canyon walls, given weight and permanence by the ancient stone that surrounded them. Rebecca felt the baby move within her, a gentle reminder of the new life they were creating together. At 7 months pregnant, she glowed with the radiance that comes with carrying a child, her skin luminous and her eyes bright with hope for the future. David had been so supportive throughout her pregnancy, attending every doctor's appointment, reading parenting books, talking excitedly about their plans for the nursery. He had proposed the moment they learned she was carrying a girl, insisting that their daughter deserved to be born into a family bound by marriage as well as love. The morning progressed beautifully, with Robert guiding them through vows that honored both Rebecca's heritage and their shared faith. David's words were eloquent and heartfelt, speaking of forever and always, of being her protector and provider, of loving both her and their unborn child with every fiber of his being. Rebecca felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she responded with her own promises, her voice strong despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. It was during the ring exchange that she first noticed David's hands shaking. At first, she attributed it to wedding nerves, the natural anxiety that comes with making such a profound commitment. But there was something else in his eyes, something that made her stomach clench with sudden unease. He fumbled with her ring, nearly dropping it twice before finally managing to slide it onto her finger. His skin was pale despite the warm morning sun, and a thin sheen of perspiration had broken out across his forehead. Marcus stepped forward with David's ring, but instead of the simple gold band they had chosen together, he pressed something else into Rebecca's palm. It was a crumpled piece of paper, folded hastily and slightly damp with sweat. David's eyes met hers for just a moment, and in that instant, she saw something that chilled her to the bone: fear, guilt, and something else that looked disturbingly like goodbye. Robert continued with the ceremony, unaware of the silent drama unfolding before him. The other guests watched with happy smiles, their attention focused on what they believed was a moment of pure joy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. The words written there in David's familiar handwriting struck her like physical blows, each letter a knife to her heart. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I can't do this. The baby isn't mine. I know about Tom. I know about everything. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't try to find me." The paper fluttered from her numb fingers like a wounded bird. The canyon seemed to tilt around her, the ancient stone walls pressing closer. As the truth crashed over her in waves, Tom, her ex-boyfriend from college who had visited 3 months ago, just after she and David had had their worst fight about wedding plans. One terrible night of loneliness and too much wine, a mistake she had regretted every moment since. A secret she had buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it had never happened. But David knew. Somehow he had discovered her betrayal, and he had waited until this moment, until she stood before their family and friends in her grandmother's sacred dress, to destroy everything they had built together. The cruelty of it took her breath away, left her gasping in the thin canyon air as she realized the full scope of his revenge. Robert's voice continued, but the words seemed to come from very far away, as if she were hearing them through water. She looked around desperately, searching the faces of their guests for some sign that this was all a terrible nightmare, but she found only confusion as people began to notice that something was wrong. Jennifer stepped forward, concern creasing her features, but Rebecca couldn't form words to explain what was happening. David was backing away now, his face a mask of cold determination. Marcus moved with him, and Rebecca realized with growing horror that this had been planned, orchestrated down to the smallest detail. They had brought her here, to this sacred place where her ancestors were buried, where her grandmother had taught her about the healing power of the earth, and they were going to leave her here like unwanted baggage. The wedding guests were murmuring now, their happy celebration dissolving into confusion and concern. Someone called David's name, but he didn't respond. He was already moving toward the narrow trail that led out of the canyon, his groomsmen following like a pack of wolves abandoning their prey. Rebecca tried to call out, tried to demand an explanation, but her voice caught in her throat as another contraction suddenly gripped her, stronger than any she had felt before. The stress of the moment, the shock and betrayal, had triggered something in her body. She doubled over, one hand pressed to her swollen belly while the other reached out for support that wasn't there. The pain was intense, radiating from her core through every nerve ending, and she knew with growing panic that this wasn't just emotional distress. Her body was preparing for labor, 2 months too early, in one of the most remote corners of the American Southwest. Jennifer reached her first, her arms wrapping around Rebecca's shoulders as she struggled to remain upright. Through the haze of pain and disbelief, Rebecca heard her friend calling for help, heard Robert's voice raised in anger as he demanded to know what was happening. But David and his party were already disappearing around a bend in the trail, leaving behind only dust and the echo of their footsteps on ancient stone. The remaining guests clustered around Rebecca, their faces etched with shock and concern. These were good people, friends and family who had come to witness what they believed would be a moment of pure joy. And now they found themselves witnesses to a betrayal so calculated and cruel that it seemed to defy comprehension. Jennifer knelt beside Rebecca, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, trying to offer comfort even as she fumbled for her cell phone to call for help. But there was no signal in the canyon. The same isolation that made this place sacred also made it completely cut off from the outside world. The nearest hospital was over an hour away by car, assuming they could even get Rebecca back to the vehicles parked at the canyon's rim. The trail was narrow and steep, carved into the rock face by generations of feet, completely impassable for anyone in advanced labor. Robert Flying Eagle knelt beside them, his weathered hands gentle as he examined Rebecca's condition. His eyes were dark with anger at what he had witnessed, but his voice remained calm and reassuring as he spoke to her in a mixture of English and Navajo, words of comfort and strength that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. He had seen many things in his 83 years, but the deliberate cruelty of what had just occurred left him shaken to his core. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, and Rebecca cried out as she felt her body preparing to bring new life into the world, whether she was ready or not. The irony wasn't lost on her, even through the pain and shock. She was about to give birth in the same place where her grandmother had been born, where countless generations of her people had entered the world surrounded by sacred stone and blessed by ancient spirits. But instead of joy and celebration, there was only abandonment and fear. The sun climbed higher, its rays growing stronger as they reflected off the canyon walls. The temperature was rising, and Rebecca knew that if her daughter chose to be born today, it would be without modern medical care, without the safety net of hospitals and doctors that most women took for granted. She would be entirely dependent on the wisdom of Robert and the other elders present, on knowledge passed down through generations of traditional healers who had helped bring life into the world long before there were medical degrees and sterile delivery rooms. Jennifer was still trying desperately to get a signal on her phone, climbing higher on the rocky outcropping that formed one wall of the ceremonial space. Her bridesmaid dress was already torn and dirty from scrambling over the rough stone, but she didn't seem to care. She was Rebecca's oldest friend, the one person who had never judged her for her mistakes, and now she was trying everything in her power to summon help that might not come in time. The other guests were discussing options. In hushed tones, their wedding finery looking absurdly out of place against the rugged backdrop of the canyon. Someone suggested trying to carry Rebecca out, but Robert shook his head gravely. Moving a woman in active labor over such treacherous terrain would be dangerous for both mother and child. They were trapped here until the baby decided to make her appearance, whenever that might be. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to center herself, drawing on the meditation techniques her grandmother had taught her as a child. In through the nose, out through the mouth, feeling the breath move through her body like a river flowing through stone. The canyon walls seemed to pulse around her, as if the earth itself were breathing with her, offering what comfort it could in this moment of crisis. But even as she tried to find peace, anger burned in her chest like a living thing. David's betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took her breath away. He had known about her pregnancy complications, known that stress could trigger early labor, and he had chosen this moment and this place to deliver his revenge. The man she had loved, the man she had planned to spend her life with, had deliberately put both her and their unborn child in mortal danger to satisfy his wounded pride. The pain came again, rolling through her like thunder across the desert, and Rebecca gripped Jennifer's hand so tightly that her friend winced. But Jennifer didn't pull away. She stayed right there, whispering words of encouragement and love, being the anchor that Rebecca desperately needed in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. Robert was speaking quietly with the other elders present, their voices carrying the weight of serious consultation. Rebecca caught fragments of their conversation, words in Navajo that spoke of sacred obligations and ancient responsibilities. They were discussing something important, something that went beyond just helping a woman give birth. There was a gravity to their tone that suggested they understood the spiritual significance of what was happening here. As the morning wore on and Rebecca's labor progressed, she began to understand that this wasn't just a medical emergency happening in an inconvenient location. This was something more, something that connected her to the long line of women who had given birth in this sacred place, who had trusted in the wisdom of the earth and the knowledge of the healers to bring new life safely into the world. Her grandmother's spirit seemed to hover at the edges of her awareness, offering guidance and strength from beyond the veil that separates the living from the dead. The sun reached its zenith, beating down on the canyon floor with an intensity that made the air shimmer like water. Rebecca's wedding dress was soaked with perspiration, the delicate fabric clinging to her skin as her body worked to bring forth the child that had been growing within her for 7 months. Each contraction brought her closer to the moment when she would hold her daughter for the first time, but also closer to the terrifying reality of giving birth without medical supervision in one of the most remote places on Earth. Jennifer had finally given up trying to get a signal and had returned to Rebecca's side, her face flushed with exertion and worry. The other guests had formed a protective circle around them, their presence offering what comfort they could even, as they struggled to process the shocking turn the day had taken. What had begun as a celebration of love and commitment had become something else entirely, a test of human kindness and the power of community in the face of cruelty and abandonment. Robert knelt beside Rebecca again, his hands gentle as he checked her progress. His expression was serious but not panicked, and Rebecca drew strength from his calm competence. He had delivered babies before, she realized, probably many of them in circumstances far more challenging than a modern hospital could imagine. The traditional ways weren't inferior to modern medicine, just different, relying on centuries of accumulated wisdom rather than technological intervention. The canyon walls seemed to lean in closer as the afternoon progressed, as if the ancient stone were offering protection and shelter to the small group of humans struggling with one of life's most fundamental experiences. Shadows began to creep across the ceremonial space, providing blessed relief from the blazing sun, and Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace beginning to settle over her despite the pain and uncertainty. This was her heritage, she realized. This connection to the earth, this trust in the natural processes of life and death, this understanding that human beings were part of something much larger than themselves. Her grandmother had taught her these lessons as a child, but she had forgotten them in the rush to embrace modern life, to fit into David's world of schedules and expectations and medical interventions for every natural process. Now abandoned and betrayed, she was being forced to remember who she really was and where she came from. The woman giving birth in this sacred canyon wasn't just Rebecca Martinez, the abandoned bride who had been betrayed by the man she loved. She was the granddaughter of Maria Santos, the great-granddaughter of Elena Windwalker, part of an unbroken line of strong women who had faced life's challenges with courage and dignity. As another contraction built and crested, Rebecca found herself drawing on that strength, on the knowledge that she wasn't really alone even though David had abandoned her. She was surrounded by the spirits of her ancestors, by the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had faced similar trials and emerged victorious. The canyon itself was a witness to her struggle, its ancient walls holding the echoes of every cry of pain and every first breath that had ever been taken within its embrace. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when Rebecca felt the unmistakable urge to push. Her daughter was ready to enter the world, whether her father was there to welcome her or not. Robert's eyes met hers, and she saw approval and encouragement in his weathered features. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the culmination of hours of labor and a lifetime of preparation. Jennifer squeezed her hand, tears streaming down her face as she realized what was about to happen. The other guests gathered closer, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and concern as they prepared to witness something that most people never see outside of a hospital setting. But there was something profound about this moment, something that transcended the clinical efficiency of modern birth and connected them all to something timeless and sacred. The first push brought a rush of sensation that was both painful and exhilarating. Rebecca could feel her daughter moving, fighting her way toward the light and air that waited beyond the safe darkness of the womb. Each contraction was a wave of power that seemed to come not just from her own body, but from the earth itself, as if the canyon were lending its strength to help bring forth new life. Robert's voice guided her through the process, his words carrying the authority of tradition and the gentleness of genuine care. He spoke of breathing and pushing, of trusting her body's wisdom and allowing the natural process to unfold in its own time. But underneath his practical instructions, Rebecca heard something else, something that spoke of the sacred nature of what was happening here. The sun was beginning to set, painting the canyon walls in brilliant shades of red and gold, when Rebecca felt the moment of transition arrive. With one final push that seemed to draw on every reserve of strength she possessed, she felt her daughter slip free into the waiting hands of Robert Flying Eagle. The old man's face was illuminated with wonder as he lifted the tiny, perfect form of a baby girl, her skin glistening and her lungs already expanding to release her first cry into the sacred air of Cedar Canyon. The sound of that cry echoed off the ancient walls like a song of triumph, and Rebecca felt tears of joy and relief streaming down her face as she reached out to receive her daughter. The baby was beautiful, perfect in every way, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite having just entered the world. She was small but healthy, her cries strong and clear as she protested her sudden transition from the warm darkness of the womb to the cool evening air of the canyon. Robert placed the baby on Rebecca's chest, his eyes shining with tears as he witnessed the miracle of new life beginning in this sacred place. The umbilical cord still connected mother and child, a physical reminder of the bond they had shared for the past 7 months. But now there was something new as well. The baby's eyes found Rebecca's face, and in that moment of first contact, Rebecca felt a love so fierce and protective that it took her breath away. This was her daughter, born not in the sterile safety of a hospital, but in the embrace of sacred stone, delivered by the hands of a traditional healer in the same canyon, where her ancestors had entered the world for countless generations. There was something profoundly right about this, something that made David's abandonment seem not like a tragedy, but like a blessing in disguise. Her daughter would begin her life connected to the earth and the old ways, grounded in tradition, and surrounded by the love of people who understood the true meaning of community. Jennifer was sobbing openly now, her hands clasped together as she witnessed the miracle of birth for the first time. The other guests were equally moved, their faces reflecting the awe and wonder that comes with being present for one of life's most sacred moments. Even the canyon itself seemed to pulse with joy, the ancient walls glowing in the last light of day as if celebrating the arrival of a new soul into the world. Robert worked efficiently to cut the cord and clean the baby, his movements sure and practiced despite his advanced age. He wrapped the tiny girl in a soft blanket that one of the guests had provided, then handed her back to Rebecca with a smile that seemed to contain all the wisdom of his 83 years. The baby settled against her mother's chest with a contented sigh as if she had always known this was where she belonged. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the canyon, Rebecca cradled her daughter and felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the wedding that had never happened. This was what mattered, this perfect little being who had fought her way into the world despite all the obstacles placed in her path. David's betrayal had been cruel and heartless, but it had also revealed the truth about his character. A man who would abandon a pregnant woman in such a deliberate and calculated way was not someone worthy of raising a child. The baby opened her eyes again, and Rebecca was struck by their depth and clarity. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that spoke of wisdom beyond her minutes of existence. She was a child born in sacred space, delivered by traditional hands, welcomed into the world by the spirits of her ancestors. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength of countless generations flowing through her veins. As the canyon settled into the peaceful quiet of evening, Rebecca knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be practical matters to deal with, legal issues to resolve, and the difficult process of rebuilding her life as a single mother. But tonight, in this sacred place where life had triumphed over betrayal and love had conquered abandonment, she held her daughter close and felt nothing but gratitude for the miracle they had both survived. The old ways had not failed her. The traditions her grandmother had taught her, the connection to the earth and its healing power, had seen her through the darkest moment of her life and delivered her safely to the other side. Her daughter would grow up knowing these truths, understanding that strength comes not from the approval of others, but from the deep roots that connect us to something eternal and unchanging. In the gathering darkness of Cedar Canyon, as the ancient stars wheeled overhead and the spirits of countless ancestors watched with approval, Rebecca Martinez held her newborn daughter and knew that they were both exactly where they were meant to be. The first rays of dawn crept across the canyon rim like gentle fingers, painting the ancient stone walls in shades of rose and amber. Rebecca stirred from the restless sleep that had claimed her in the early hours of morning. Her newborn daughter nestled against her chest in the makeshift shelter that Robert Flying Eagle and the other elders had constructed during the night. The baby's breathing was steady and strong. Her tiny fist curled around a strand of Rebecca's dark hair, as if anchoring herself to this new world she had entered with such dramatic timing. Jennifer sat nearby, her bridesmaid dress now torn and stained beyond recognition, but her eyes alert and watchful as she maintained her vigil over mother and child. She had refused to leave Rebecca's side throughout the long night, even when some of the other wedding guests had suggested hiking out to get help. The canyon had become their temporary sanctuary, but it was also their prison. With no way to communicate with the outside world and no clear path forward, the events of the previous day felt surreal in the pale morning light. Rebecca's mind struggled to process the magnitude of David's betrayal, the calculated cruelty of abandoning her at the altar with their child fighting to be born. The man she had loved, the man she had planned to spend her life with, had orchestrated the entire scene with a precision that spoke of weeks or months of planning. He had known about her affair with Tom, had discovered her secret somehow, and had chosen this moment and this place to extract his revenge. But as Rebecca looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she found it difficult to summon the rage that should have been burning in her chest. The baby was so perfect, so completely innocent of the circumstances that had brought her into the world 2 months early. Her skin had the translucent quality of a premature infant, but her breathing was strong and her color good. Robert had assured Rebecca throughout the night that the child was healthy despite her early arrival, that the old ways of assessing newborns were often more reliable than modern medical technology. The canyon itself seemed to pulse with protective energy as the sun climbed higher, its ancient walls forming a natural amphitheater around the small group of people who had found themselves witness to one of life's most fundamental miracles. Robert moved among them with quiet efficiency, checking on Rebecca and the baby, offering reassurance and guidance drawn from decades of experience as a traditional healer. His presence was a steadying force in a situation that could easily have descended into panic. The other wedding guests had spent the night huddled around a small fire that Robert had built in the center of the ceremonial space. They were good people, friends and family, who had come to witness what they believed would be a joyful celebration, and now found themselves stranded in one of the most remote corners of the American Southwest, with a woman who had just given birth under the most primitive of conditions. Their shock at David's abandonment had given way to a grim determination to see Rebecca and her daughter safely through whatever challenges lay ahead. Thomas Wright, Rebecca's uncle who had driven down from Albuquerque for the wedding, emerged from the morning shadows carrying an armload of firewood he had gathered from the canyon floor. His face was grim as he knelt to rebuild the fire, his movements careful and deliberate. He had been one of the most vocal critics of David's behavior the night before, his anger at the betrayal burning hot despite his usual calm demeanor. As a father of 3 daughters himself, the idea of abandoning a pregnant woman in such a calculated way filled him with a rage that was barely contained. Rebecca's cousin Maria appeared beside the fire as well, her wedding outfit replaced by more practical clothing she had found in her overnight bag. She had appointed herself as the group's organizer, taking inventory of their supplies and trying to formulate some kind of plan for getting everyone safely out of the canyon. The nearest road was a steep 3-mile hike through treacherous terrain, completely impossible for a woman who had just given birth. They were effectively trapped until Rebecca was strong enough to travel, which could be days or even weeks depending on her recovery. The baby stirred against Rebecca's chest, making the small mewing sounds that newborns use to communicate their needs. Rebecca felt the familiar tightening in her breasts that signaled her milk was coming in, her body responding to her daughter's presence with the ancient rhythms that had sustained human life for millennia. She had read about breastfeeding in the pregnancy books that lined her shelves at home, but the reality was something entirely different, a physical connection that seemed to transcend conscious thought. Robert approached with a steaming cup of tea brewed from herbs he had gathered in the canyon. The liquid was bitter but warming, and Rebecca could feel it spreading through her body like liquid comfort. The old man's eyes were kind but serious as he examined her and the baby, his weathered hands gentle as he checked for any signs of complications from the birth. His knowledge came not from medical school, but from generations of tradition, passed down through oral instruction and practical experience. The morning progressed with agonizing slowness as the group tried to come to terms with their situation. Several of the guests had hiked to higher ground in an attempt to get cell phone reception, but the canyon's depth and the surrounding terrain made communication with the outside world impossible. They were completely cut off from modern civilization, dependent on their own resources and the wisdom of Robert Flying Eagle to see them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Rebecca found herself thinking about her grandmother, Maria Santos, who had died 3 years earlier, but whose presence seemed to hover at the edges of her consciousness. The old woman had been a traditional healer herself, respected throughout the region for her knowledge of plants and their medicinal properties. She had tried to pass on her wisdom to Rebecca, but the young woman had been too caught up in her modern life to pay proper attention. Now trapped in this sacred canyon with a newborn baby, Rebecca wished desperately that she had listened more carefully to those ancient lessons. The baby's cry pierced the morning air, a sound that seemed to echo off the canyon walls with startling clarity. Rebecca shifted her position, trying to find a comfortable way to nurse while sitting on the hard ground with only a thin blanket for cushioning. The process was more difficult than she had expected, requiring patience and persistence as both mother and child learned the delicate dance of feeding. But when the baby finally latched on successfully, Rebecca felt a surge of triumph that had nothing to do with modern conveniences or medical supervision. Jennifer knelt beside them, her face soft with wonder as she watched the intimate moment. between mother and child. She had been Rebecca's roommate in college, her maid of honor at the wedding that never happened, and now she was witnessing the most primal and essential of human experiences. The friendship between the two women had deepened over the years, but this shared crisis had forged a bond that would last for the rest of their lives. The sun climbed higher, its rays growing stronger as they reflected off the canyon walls and concentrated the heat in the enclosed space. Robert had constructed a simple shelter using branches and the wedding decorations that had been abandoned when David fled, creating a shaded area where Rebecca could rest with her daughter. The old man's resourcefulness was impressive, his ability to create comfort and safety from the most basic materials, speaking to a lifetime of living close to the land. As the day wore on, Rebecca began to understand the full scope of their predicament. They had enough food and water for perhaps 2 or 3 days, assuming careful rationing. The canyon had natural springs that provided fresh water, but getting Rebecca and the baby out would require either a rescue operation or waiting until she was strong enough to make the difficult hike herself. Either option presented significant challenges, especially with a premature newborn who needed constant care and attention. The other guests were coping with the situation in their own ways. Some paced restlessly around the ceremonial space, their city-bred instincts rebelling against the enforced inactivity. Others sat quietly, perhaps coming to terms with the fact that they were experiencing something that would change them forever. There was something profound about being present for a birth, especially under such dramatic circumstances, that forced people to confront the fundamental realities of existence. Thomas had taken on the role of informal leader among the men, organizing efforts to gather firewood and explore the immediate area for any resources that might prove useful. His anger at David's betrayal continued to simmer beneath the surface, but he channeled it into productive activity, determined to do everything possible to ensure Rebecca and her daughter's safety. The bond between uncle and niece had always been strong, but this crisis had awakened a protective instinct that ran deeper than family obligation. Maria moved efficiently around the makeshift camp, her nursing background evident in the way she assessed Rebecca's condition and monitored the baby's health. She had worked in a hospital emergency room for 5 years before switching to a less stressful position in a clinic, and her medical knowledge provided a modern complement to Robert's traditional wisdom. The combination of old and new, ancient practice and contemporary understanding created a support system that was both practical and deeply rooted in cultural tradition. The baby slept peacefully after her feeding, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of healthy breathing. Rebecca marveled at her daughter's perfection, at the delicate features that seemed to blend the best of both parents, despite the circumstances of her conception. The question of paternity hung unspoken in the air, a complication that would need to be addressed eventually, but seemed irrelevant in the face of more immediate concerns. Robert sat nearby, his ancient eyes fixed on something beyond the canyon walls, as if he were reading signs invisible to the others. His presence was both comforting and mysterious, a connection to ways of knowing that predated modern science by thousands of years. He had delivered babies before, Rebecca realized, probably many of them in circumstances that would terrify most contemporary parents. The traditional ways weren't primitive or inferior, just different, relying on accumulated wisdom rather than technological intervention. The afternoon heat grew oppressive as the sun reached its zenith, turning the canyon floor into a natural oven. Rebecca felt weak and dizzy despite Robert's herbal teas and the efforts of her friends to keep her comfortable. The stress of the previous day, combined with the physical demands of childbirth and the emotional trauma of David's abandonment, was taking its toll on her body. She needed rest and proper nutrition, medical care, and the safety of a controlled environment. Instead, she was trapped in one of the most remote places on Earth with a newborn baby and a group of well-meaning but essentially helpless wedding guests. The baby stirred restlessly in the heat, her tiny body working to regulate its temperature. In the challenging environment, Rebecca felt a stab of fear as she realized how vulnerable her daughter was. How many things could go wrong without proper medical support? Premature babies needed careful monitoring, specialized care, and immediate access to emergency intervention if complications arose. Here in the canyon, they had none of those safeguards, only the knowledge of an elderly traditional healer and the determination of friends and family to see them through. As the shadows began to lengthen with the approach of evening, a new sound echoed through the canyon that made everyone freeze with sudden hope. It was the distant drone of an aircraft, growing steadily louder as it approached their location. Thomas and several others scrambled up the rocky slopes to try to signal the pilot, waving bright clothing and shouting at the top of their lungs, despite knowing their voices wouldn't carry that far. The aircraft appeared over the canyon rim, a small helicopter painted in the distinctive colors of the local search and rescue service. It circled the area several times, the pilot clearly having spotted the wedding party stranded on the canyon floor. But landing in the narrow ceremonial space was impossible. The rotor wash from the helicopter's blades stirring up clouds of dust and debris that forced everyone to take cover. A rope ladder dropped from the aircraft, swaying in the downdraft as a uniformed rescue worker prepared to descend. But Rebecca knew immediately that evacuation by helicopter would be impossible for her and the baby. The journey up the ladder would be treacherous under the best of circumstances, potentially fatal for a woman who had given birth less than 24 hours earlier. The rescue team would need to find another solution, some way to get medical care to her rather than trying to extract her from the canyon. The rescue worker who descended the ladder was a young woman named Sarah Mitchell, a paramedic with years of experience in wilderness emergencies. She moved efficiently around the makeshift camp, assessing the situation with professional competence while maintaining the kind of calm demeanor that comes from extensive training. Her equipment pack contained medical supplies and communication gear that seemed almost miraculous after a night of complete isolation. Sarah's examination of Rebecca and the baby was thorough but gentle, her hands skilled as she checked for signs of complications from the birth. The newborn's vital signs were strong despite her premature arrival, her reflexes normal and her breathing clear. Rebecca's condition was more concerning, with signs of dehydration and exhaustion that would require careful monitoring. But both mother and child were stable enough to remain in the canyon while more complex rescue arrangements were made. The radio communication with the outside world brought news that was both reassuring and troubling. Medical equipment and additional personnel were being mobilized for a ground-based rescue operation, but it would take time to organize and execute. The terrain between the canyon and the nearest road was challenging even for experienced rescue workers, requiring careful planning and specialized equipment to evacuate a woman with a newborn baby safely. Jennifer stayed close to Rebecca throughout the examination, her loyalty unwavering despite the hardships they were all enduring. The friendship between the two women had been tested by crisis and emerged stronger than ever. Jennifer's presence was a constant reminder that not everyone would abandon her when life became difficult, that there were people in the world worthy of trust and capable of genuine love. The news of David's betrayal had spread beyond their small group, carried by the rescue workers who had been briefed on the situation. Rebecca felt a flush of shame as she realized that her humiliation was becoming public knowledge, that people she had never met now knew the most painful details of her personal life. But the shame was tempered by anger, a growing realization that David's actions said nothing about her worth as a person and everything about his character. As evening approached and the rescue helicopter departed with promises to return the following day, Rebecca found herself oddly at peace despite their continued isolation. The canyon had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the artificial complexities of modern life had been stripped away to reveal the essential truths of human existence. She was a mother now, responsible for a new life that depended entirely on her care and protection. Everything else seemed secondary to that fundamental reality. Robert built up the fire as darkness fell, the flames casting dancing shadows on the ancient stone walls. The old man began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of tradition as he told stories of other births that had taken place in this sacred canyon, other women who had brought new life into the world under the protection of the ancient spirits. His words were soothing and meaningful, connecting Rebecca's experience to a long line of mothers who had faced similar challenges with courage and grace. The night sounds of the canyon began to emerge as civilization's noise faded into memory. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate, the sound echoing off the stone walls with haunting beauty. The stars appeared one by one in the narrow strip of sky visible between the canyon rims, their light seeming closer and more brilliant than it ever had in the city. The baby slept peacefully in Rebecca's arms, her breathing steady and strong. Despite the challenging circumstances of her birth, Jennifer wrapped a blanket around Rebecca's shoulders, her touch gentle and protective. The two women sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire and listening to Robert's stories of the old days when people lived closer to the earth and understood their place in the larger rhythms of existence. The modern world with its schedules and complications seemed very far away, replaced by something more fundamental and enduring. The canyon held them all in its ancient embrace as the night deepened, offering shelter and protection to the small group of humans who had found themselves witnesses to one of life's most essential miracles. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight there was only the fire, the stars, and the quiet breathing of a newborn child who had entered the world surrounded by love, despite the circumstances that had brought her here. Rebecca closed her eyes and felt her grandmother's presence surrounding her like a gentle wind, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of strong women who had faced life's trials with courage and dignity. Her daughter would grow up knowing these stories, understanding her connection to this sacred place and the traditions that had sustained her people for thousands of years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, mother and child united by bonds that no betrayal could ever break. The third day in Cedar Canyon dawned with an unusual stillness that seemed to settle over the ancient stone walls. Like a blanket of anticipation, Rebecca woke to find her daughter nursing contentedly, the baby's tiny fist opening and closing against her mother's skin with instinctive rhythm. The morning light revealed changes in both of them that spoke to their remarkable adaptation to their circumstances. Rebecca's face had lost the pallor of exhaustion, replaced by a glow that seemed to come from deep within, while the baby's skin had taken on the healthy pink coloration that indicated she was thriving despite her premature arrival. Robert, flying eagle, sat cross-legged near the dying embers of the night's fire, his weathered hands working with practiced precision as he prepared a mixture of herbs gathered from the canyon's hidden corners. His movements were deliberate and ritualistic, each action carrying the weight of ceremony that transformed simple plant matter into something approaching the sacred. The old man had slept little during their time in the canyon, maintaining a vigil that seemed to encompass both the physical and spiritual well-being of everyone under his protection. The makeshift camp had evolved over the past days into something resembling a small village, with designated areas for cooking, sleeping, and the various activities necessary for survival. Thomas had proven himself remarkably resourceful, using his engineering background to devise solutions for problems ranging from water collection to waste disposal. His systematic approach to their challenges had helped maintain morale during the long hours of waiting for rescue, turning what could have been a desperate situation into something more manageable. Maria moved quietly around the camp, her nursing instincts keeping her constantly alert to any changes in Rebecca's condition or signs of distress in the baby. She had taken on the role of medical advisor, complementing Robert's traditional knowledge with her contemporary training. The partnership between modern medicine and ancient wisdom had created a support system that was both practical and deeply meaningful, bridging the gap between two different ways of understanding health and healing. Jennifer remained Rebecca's constant companion, her loyalty unwavering despite the hardships they had all endured. The friendship between the two women had deepened beyond anything either had previously experienced, forged in the crucible of crisis and strengthened by shared adversity. Jennifer's presence provided emotional stability that was perhaps more valuable than any medical intervention, a reminder that love and commitment could survive even the most challenging circumstances. The baby stirred in Rebecca's arms, her dark eyes opening to regard the world with the solemn attention of someone much older than her 3 days of existence. There was something ancient in that gaze, something that spoke of wisdom inherited rather than learned. Robert had commented on it the previous evening, noting that children born in sacred places often carried a special connection to the spiritual realm, a sensitivity to forces that most adults had forgotten how to perceive. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the canyon, carried by the acoustic properties of the stone walls that amplified every noise from the world above. The rescue operation that had been promised was finally materializing, bringing with it the promise of medical care and eventual evacuation from their isolation. But as the sounds grew closer, Rebecca found herself experiencing unexpected reluctance to leave the sanctuary that the canyon had become. The first rescue workers to reach the canyon floor were a team of specialized wilderness medics, their equipment packs bulging with supplies designed for exactly this type of emergency. They moved with professional efficiency, quickly establishing a perimeter around Rebecca and the baby while conducting a thorough assessment of their condition. The lead medic, a soft-spoken man named Dr. James Walking Bear, was himself of Native American descent, and his respectful interaction with Robert suggested a deep understanding of the cultural significance of their situation. Dr. Walking Bear's examination was thorough but gentle, his hands skilled as he checked both mother and child for any signs of complications that might have developed during their extended stay in the canyon. The baby's responses were all within normal ranges for a child of her gestational age, her neurological reflexes sharp and her breathing clear. Rebecca's recovery had progressed remarkably well, aided by the traditional remedies that Robert had been administering and the emotional support of her friends and family. The conversation between Dr. Walking Bear and Robert was conducted partly in English and partly in languages that the others didn't understand, but the mutual respect between the two men was evident in their manner and tone. They were discussing not just medical matters, but spiritual considerations, acknowledging that the child's birth in this sacred place carried implications that went beyond physical health. The convergence of traditional and modern approaches to healing created a holistic perspective that honored both practical necessity and cultural meaning. The logistics of evacuation proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. The terrain between the canyon floor and the nearest road was treacherous, requiring specialized equipment and careful coordination to transport a woman and newborn safely. A helicopter landing zone had been prepared on the canyon rim, but getting Rebecca and the baby to that location would require a challenging climb that could take several hours and pose significant risks to both patients. As the rescue team discussed their options, Rebecca found herself listening to Robert's quiet voice as he spoke with her about choices that went beyond mere logistics. The old man's words carried the weight of prophecy as he described visions that had come to him during his vigils, images of the child's future that suggested her birth in this sacred place was no accident, but part of a larger pattern that would unfold over years and decades to come. The baby had been born during new moon, Robert explained, in a canyon that had been sacred to his people for generations beyond counting. Children born under such circumstances often carried special gifts, heightened sensitivity to the spiritual realm, and a calling to serve as bridges between the ancient ways and the modern world. Rebecca listened with growing wonder as the old man described her daughter not as an accident or complication but as a blessing whose arrival had been foretold. In the movements of stars and the whispers of wind through stone. The afternoon brought a change in the weather that seemed to reflect the spiritual energy Robert had been describing. Clouds gathered over the canyon rim, their shadows racing across the stone walls in patterns that resembled ancient symbols. The air grew thick with the promise of rain, carrying with it the rich scent of desert sage and the mysterious fragrances that emerged from earth, touched by moisture after long drought. Thomas and several other men had been working with the rescue team to establish a secure route out of the canyon, but their efforts were complicated by the unstable nature of the terrain and the need to ensure absolute safety for Rebecca and the baby. Each potential path presented its own challenges, from loose rock faces that could trigger dangerous slides to narrow ledges that would require ropes and specialized climbing equipment to navigate safely. The baby began to fuss as the atmospheric pressure changed with the approaching storm, her tiny body responding to environmental cues with the sensitivity common to newborns. Rebecca found that nursing calmed her daughter, creating a peaceful bubble of intimacy even as the adult world swirled with urgent preparations and difficult decisions. The act of feeding her child had become a meditation, a return to fundamental rhythms that connected her to every mother who had ever lived. Jennifer sat nearby, her face reflecting the complex emotions that had been building over their days. In the canyon, the experience had changed all of them in ways that would take time to fully understand, challenging assumptions about what was truly necessary for happiness and forcing them to confront the difference between convenience and genuine need. The modern world, with its endless distractions and artificial urgencies, seemed less compelling now that they had experienced the clarity that came with focusing on essential things. Dr. Walking Bear approached Rebecca with news that would require another difficult decision. The medical evaluation had revealed that while both she and the baby were stable, transportation out of the canyon in the approaching storm would be extremely dangerous. The alternative was to wait for better weather conditions, which could mean several more days in their primitive circumstances. The choice was hers to make, weighing the risks of immediate evacuation against the challenges of extended isolation. Robert's voice joined the discussion, carrying the authority of someone who had spent 8 decades learning to read the signs of weather and season in this harsh but beautiful landscape. The storm approaching was more than just rain, he explained, but a spiritual cleansing that would wash away the negative energy left by David's betrayal and sanctify the ground where new life had entered the world. To leave before its completion would be to miss an essential part of the healing process that had begun with the baby's birth. The decision ultimately rested with Rebecca, but as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, she found herself drawn to Robert's perspective in ways that surprised her rational mind. The baby had been born in this sacred place for reasons that went beyond mere circumstance, and perhaps their continued presence here was equally meaningful. The modern world would still be waiting when they were ready to return to it, but this opportunity to experience something timeless and transformative might never come again. The rescue team agreed to establish a more permanent camp on the canyon rim, maintaining radio contact and medical oversight, while allowing Rebecca to make her own choice about timing. Dr. Walking Bear left additional supplies and equipment, ensuring that any emergency could be handled promptly, but his manner suggested that he understood the deeper currents at work in the situation. Sometimes healing required more than medical intervention, more than the simple restoration of physical function. As evening approached and the first drops of rain began to fall, Robert began preparations for a ceremony that he described as a naming ritual, a traditional blessing for children born in sacred places. The other members of their group were invited to participate, becoming part of a circle that connected the baby not just to her immediate family but to the larger community that had witnessed her birth and supported her mother through crisis. The rain intensified as darkness fell, drumming against the stone walls with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. Robert had built the fire in a sheltered alcove where it would remain dry, and the dancing flames cast shifting shadows that transformed the canyon walls into a canvas of moving images. The ceremony he conducted was simple but profound, involving each member of their group in the creation of a protective circle around mother and child. Rebecca found herself deeply moved by the ritual, which honored not just her daughter's birth, but the circumstances that had brought them all together in this sacred place. The words Robert spoke were in languages she didn't understand, but their meaning seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to something deeper and more fundamental. This was her daughter's true birth ceremony, she realized, not the sterile efficiency of a hospital delivery room, but this ancient acknowledgement of new life entering the world under the protection of spirits and community. The baby slept peacefully through the ceremony, as if the voices and gentle chanting were as natural to her as her mother's heartbeat. When Robert placed a tiny bracelet of woven grass around her wrist, marking her as a child of the canyon, Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate. This was her heritage being passed down to the next generation, the connection to land and tradition that her grandmother had tried to teach her, but that she had been too busy with modern life to fully appreciate. Jennifer participated in the ceremony with reverence that spoke to her own transformation during their time in the canyon. The bridesmaid dress she had worn to what was supposed to be Rebecca's wedding had been replaced by simple, practical clothing that seemed more appropriate to their current circumstances. The friend who had entered the canyon was still present, but she had been changed by witnessing birth and participating in ancient rituals that connected her to something larger than her individual existence. Thomas and Maria joined their voices to the circle, their participation creating bonds that went beyond family obligation to something approaching the sacred. The experience of supporting Rebecca through crisis and welcoming her daughter into the world had forged connections that would last for the rest of their lives. They were no longer just wedding guests who had gotten caught up in an unfortunate situation, but participants in something miraculous and transformative. The storm raged through the night, washing the canyon clean with torrents of water that cascaded down the stone walls in temporary waterfalls. The sound was both fierce and soothing, a reminder of the power of natural forces that had shaped this landscape over millions of years. Inside their shelter, the small group huddled around the fire and listened to Robert's stories of other storms, other ceremonies, other children who had been blessed in this sacred place. When morning came, the canyon had been transformed by the night's rain. Colors that had been muted by dust and drought now blazed with renewed intensity, and the air itself seemed cleaner and more vibrant. Water pooled in natural basins carved into the stone, creating mirrors that reflected the sky and clouds in perfect detail. The entire landscape seemed to pulse with renewed life and energy. Rebecca woke to find her daughter gazing up at her, with eyes that seemed even more alert and aware than before. The baby's coloring had improved dramatically, taking on the healthy, pink hue that indicated she was not just surviving but thriving in their unusual circumstances. Dr. Walking Bear's radio check confirmed that both patients remained stable. But Rebecca had already known that from the sense of strength and vitality that seemed to flow through her own body. The ceremony of the previous evening had marked a turning point not just for the baby, but for all of them. They had become something more than a random collection of individuals thrown together by circumstance. They were now a community, bound by shared experience and mutual care in ways that transcended the casual connections of ordinary social interaction. The bonds forged in crisis and strengthened by ritual would endure long after they returned to their separate lives. Jennifer sat beside Rebecca as they shared the simple breakfast that Thomas had prepared from their remaining supplies. The conversation between the two friends had taken on a depth that reflected their shared transformation during the past days. They spoke of plans and possibilities, of how this experience would change their approach to life and relationships, of lessons learned, about what truly mattered when everything else was stripped away. Robert approached them with news that the weather had cleared enough to make evacuation possible, but his manner suggested that the choice was still theirs to make. The rescue team remained ready to assist whenever they decided to leave, but there was no urgency beyond their own desires and needs. The canyon had become a sanctuary where they could remain as long as necessary, healing and growing stronger before returning to face the challenges of the outside world. The baby stirred in Rebecca's arms, making the small sounds that indicated she was ready to nurse again. As Rebecca settled into the familiar rhythm of feeding her daughter, she felt a profound sense of completion that had nothing to do with medical care or modern conveniences. This was how children had been nourished for thousands of years. This simple exchange between mother and child that required nothing beyond love and commitment and the wisdom of bodies that knew their purpose. The question of when to leave the canyon had become less pressing as the hours passed, replaced by a growing understanding that their time here was serving purposes that went beyond mere survival. They were learning things about themselves and each other that could only be discovered in circumstances that stripped away the artificial complexities of modern existence. The canyon was teaching them about strength and community, about the difference between wants and needs, about the healing power of silence and simplicity. As the sun climbed higher and painted the stone walls in brilliant colors, Rebecca made her decision with the clarity that comes from deep listening to inner wisdom. They would leave when they were truly ready, when the healing that had begun with her daughter's birth was complete, when they had learned everything the canyon had to teach them about resilience and hope and the enduring power of love in the face of betrayal and abandonment. The fifth morning in Cedar Canyon arrived with a clarity that seemed to illuminate more than just the ancient stone walls. Rebecca opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through the shelter's opening, painting everything in golden hues that made the primitive surroundings appear almost magical. Her daughter lay against her chest, breathing steadily, her tiny fingers curled around the woven grass bracelet that Robert had placed there during the naming ceremony. The baby had grown noticeably stronger during their time in the canyon, her premature features filling out and her skin taking on the healthy glow of a child who was thriving despite unconventional circumstances. The sound of voices from outside the shelter drew Rebecca's attention to a conversation taking place near the fire pit. Dr. Walking Bear had returned with a larger medical team, their equipment cases and professional demeanor bringing the outside world rushing back into their peaceful sanctuary. The discussion was animated but respectful, centered around the remarkable recovery both Rebecca and her daughter had made during their extended stay in the canyon. The medical professionals seemed genuinely amazed by their condition, particularly the baby's development despite being born 2 months premature in circumstances that should have been life-threatening. Robert Flying Eagle stood at the center of the group, his weathered hands gesturing toward the canyon walls as he spoke about the healing properties of sacred places. His words carried the authority of someone who had witnessed countless miracles. Over 8 decades of life, and even the skeptical medical professionals seemed to listen with genuine attention. The old man's presence had become the anchor around which their entire community revolved, his wisdom providing guidance that went far beyond practical survival skills. Jennifer emerged from her own sleeping area, her hair tousled and her face bearing the marks of deep, restorative sleep. The transformation in Rebecca's closest friend was perhaps even more dramatic than the changes in mother and child. The anxious, city-dwelling woman who had entered the canyon as a bridesmaid had evolved into someone more grounded and self-assured, her movements reflecting the confidence that came from discovering inner reserves of strength she hadn't known existed. The baby stirred and opened her dark eyes, regarding the world with the alert attention that had become her characteristic expression. There was something unsettling about that gaze, something that suggested awareness beyond her few days of existence. Dr. Walking Bear had commented on it during his previous visits, noting that children born in sacred places often displayed unusual sensitivity to their surroundings, as if they arrived in the world already connected to forces that most adults spent lifetimes trying to understand. Thomas appeared at the shelter entrance, his engineering mind evident in the systematic way he had organized their morning routine. The past days had revealed leadership qualities in Rebecca's uncle that surprised everyone, including himself. His careful attention to practical details had kept their small community functioning smoothly, while his emotional support had provided stability during the most challenging moments. The crisis had transformed him from a mild-mannered family member into someone capable of making life-and-death decisions with calm competence. Maria joined the gathering around the fire, her nursing background making her an invaluable bridge between Robert's traditional knowledge and the medical team's contemporary approach. The partnership that had developed between ancient wisdom and modern science had created a healing environment that honored both perspectives while serving the practical needs of their situation. Her presence had been crucial in maintaining Rebecca's health and monitoring the baby's development throughout their unconventional recovery period. The conversation between Dr. Walking Bear and Robert had shifted to include practical considerations about Rebecca's eventual return to civilization. The medical team was prepared to transport both patients to a fully equipped hospital where they could receive comprehensive care and monitoring. But the discussion also acknowledged that their remarkable recovery in the canyon raised questions about whether such intervention was truly necessary or might actually interfere with a healing process that was proceeding exceptionally well. Rebecca listened to the debate while nursing her daughter, marveling at how natural the process had become, despite her initial fears and uncertainties. The baby latched on immediately, her tiny body relaxed and content in a way that spoke to their deep physical and emotional connection. The act of breastfeeding had become a meditation for Rebecca, a return to fundamental rhythms that connected her to every mother who had ever lived, regardless of time period or cultural background. The medical team's equipment included communication devices that brought news from the outside world, information that seemed both urgent and irrelevant from their current perspective. David's abandonment had made headlines in the regional newspapers, his calculated cruelty sparking outrage among people who had never met Rebecca but understood the fundamental violation of trust and decency his actions represented. Legal proceedings were already underway, with authorities investigating potential charges related to child endangerment and abandonment. But the outside world's response to their situation felt distant and unimportant compared to the immediate reality of caring for a newborn in a sacred canyon, surrounded by people who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. The community that had formed around Rebecca and her daughter represented something rare and precious, bonds forged in crisis and strengthened by shared commitment to protecting new life under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Dr. Walking Bear approached Rebecca with test results that confirmed what everyone could already see with their own eyes. Both she and the baby were not just surviving, but thriving in ways that defied medical expectations. The infant's neurological development was progressing normally despite her premature birth, while Rebecca's recovery had exceeded all standard timelines for postpartum healing. The traditional remedies Robert had been administering, combined with the emotional support of their community, had created an environment that promoted healing in ways that modern medicine was only beginning to understand. The question of when to leave the canyon had become more complex as the days passed and their situation stabilized. What had begun as a medical emergency requiring immediate evacuation had evolved into something approaching a conscious choice about how to live and what values to prioritize. The canyon offered simplicity and connection to fundamental truths that were increasingly rare in the modern world, but it also represented isolation from resources and opportunities that might be important for the baby's future development. Robert's voice joined the discussion with observations that went beyond medical considerations to address the spiritual dimensions of their situation. The old man spoke of signs and portents, of dreams that had visited him during the night watches, of a destiny that seemed to be unfolding around the child born in sacred space during the dark of the moon. His words carried weight not because of their mystical content, but because of the demonstrated wisdom he had shown in guiding them through crisis with remarkable success. The baby finished nursing and gazed up at Rebecca with eyes that seemed to hold ancient knowledge. The connection between mother and child had deepened during their time in the canyon, strengthened by circumstances that required complete mutual dependence and trust. Rebecca had discovered reserves of maternal instinct she hadn't known existed, while her daughter had demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability that spoke to inner strength, inherited from generations of strong women. Jennifer sat beside them, her presence offering emotional support that had become essential to Rebecca's sense of security. The friendship between the two women had evolved beyond anything either had previously experienced, forged in circumstances that revealed character in ways that ordinary life rarely demanded. Jennifer's unwavering loyalty during the darkest moments had created a bond that would endure, regardless of what decisions lay ahead. The medical team's preparations for potential evacuation were thorough and professional, but their manner suggested respect for the autonomy of their patients to make their own choices about treatment and timing. Dr. Walking Bear understood the cultural significance of the canyon and the healing process that was taking place there, his own heritage providing insight into dimensions of wellness that went beyond physical health to encompass spiritual and emotional restoration. Thomas had been consulting with the rescue coordinators about logistical options, his engineering background helping him evaluate the practical challenges of different evacuation scenarios. The terrain between the canyon floor and the outside world remained treacherous, requiring careful planning and specialized equipment to ensure safety during transport. But the urgency that had driven the initial rescue efforts had diminished as it became clear that both patients were stable and improving under their current circumstances. Maria's medical assessments confirmed the remarkable progress both Rebecca and the baby had made during their extended stay in the canyon. The infant's weight gain and developmental milestones were all within normal ranges, while Rebecca's physical recovery had proceeded faster than typical for someone who had given birth under such challenging conditions. The combination of traditional healing practices and strong emotional support had created an environment that promoted wellness in ways that surprised even experienced healthcare professionals. The afternoon brought visitors who changed the entire dynamic of their situation. A group of tribal elders had made the difficult journey into the canyon, their presence lending ceremonial weight to what had already become a significant event in the community's collective memory. These were people who understood the sacred nature of the place and the spiritual implications of a child being born there during such dramatic circumstances. The eldest among them was a woman named Elena Crowfeather, whose reputation as a traditional healer and spiritual guide extended far beyond the immediate region. Her weathered face bore the marks of 8 decades of life lived close to the earth, and her eyes held the kind of deep wisdom that came from understanding forces beyond the physical realm. She approached Rebecca and the baby with reverence, her gnarled hands gentle as she examined the child who had entered the world in their sacred space. Elena's assessment went beyond medical considerations to encompass spiritual dimensions that the scientific community was only beginning to acknowledge. She spoke of the child's aura, of energy patterns that suggested special gifts and responsibilities that would unfold over the course of a lifetime. The baby had been marked by her birth in this sacred place, chosen by forces beyond human understanding to serve as a bridge between the ancient ways and the modern world. The conversation between Elena and Robert was conducted in languages that predated European contact, their words carrying meanings that couldn't be fully translated into contemporary terms. But the emotional content was clear to everyone present, a recognition that they were witnessing something significant that would be remembered and discussed for generations to come. The child's birth had become part of the canyon's history, woven into the ongoing story of a place that had been sacred for thousands of years. Rebecca found herself drawn into the discussion despite the language barrier, her own heritage providing enough cultural context to understand the general themes being explored. Elena's questions went beyond simple medical history to encompass family lineage, spiritual traditions, and the circumstances that had brought Rebecca to the canyon at this particular moment in time. The pattern that emerged suggested purposeful design rather than random coincidence. The baby responded to Elena's presence with unusual alertness, her dark eyes tracking the elder's movements with focused attention that seemed beyond her chronological age. The old woman's hands moved over the child's body without touching, reading energy patterns that were invisible to others but apparently clear to someone trained in traditional healing arts. Her expression grew increasingly serious as the examination continued, suggesting discoveries that went beyond routine assessment. Jennifer watched the proceedings with fascination, her own worldview expanding to accommodate experiences that challenged everything she had previously believed about reality and possibility. The bridesmaid who had entered the canyon was still present, but she had been fundamentally changed by witnessing birth, participating in ancient ceremonies, and observing healing practices that predated modern medicine by millennia. The transformation was visible in her posture and expression, a newfound confidence that came from discovering inner strength she hadn't known existed. Elena's consultation with the medical team created a fascinating dialogue between traditional and contemporary approaches to health and healing. Dr. Walking Bear served as translator, his own bicultural background enabling him to bridge different ways of understanding the human body and its relationship to spiritual forces. The conversation revealed remarkable similarities between ancient wisdom and cutting-edge research in fields like psychoneuroimmunology and quantum healing. The decision about when to leave the canyon had become more complex with the arrival of the tribal elders and their assessment of the situation's spiritual significance. What had begun as a medical emergency requiring immediate evacuation had evolved into a profound cultural event that demanded careful consideration of factors beyond simple physical health. The child's birth in this sacred place carried implications that would affect not just her own future, but the entire community's understanding of their relationship to the sacred. Thomas found himself struggling to reconcile his engineering mindset with experiences that defied rational explanation but were undeniably real in their effects. The practical leader who had emerged during their crisis was still present, but he had been humbled by encounters with forces that couldn't be measured or controlled through technological means. His worldview was expanding to accommodate mysteries that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Maria's nursing background provided a useful perspective on the integration of traditional and modern healing approaches. She had witnessed the remarkable recovery both Rebecca and the baby had made under Robert's care, results that exceeded anything she had seen in conventional medical settings. The experience was challenging her assumptions about what constituted proper health care and forcing her to reconsider the value of wisdom traditions that had been dismissed by contemporary medical education. The afternoon consultation extended into evening as Elena and the other elders performed their own ceremonies of blessing and protection around the mother and child. These rituals were more elaborate than Robert's simpler blessings, involving chants and movements that seemed to invoke spiritual forces beyond ordinary human perception. The baby remained calm throughout the proceedings, as if the ancient words and gestures were as natural to her as her mother's heartbeat. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she participated in ceremonies that connected her to generations of ancestors who had faced similar challenges with courage and faith. The spiritual dimension of her experience in the canyon was becoming as important as the physical healing, offering restoration at levels that went beyond medical intervention to encompass her entire sense of identity and purpose. As darkness fell and the ceremonies concluded, Alina approached Rebecca with words that would prove prophetic in the months and years to come. The child born in this sacred place was destined for great things, the elder explained, but her path would require careful guidance and protection from forces that would seek to exploit or corrupt her gifts. The choice of whether to remain in the canyon or return to the outside world was ultimately Rebecca's to make, but it carried implications that extended far beyond personal preference to encompass spiritual responsibilities that would affect future generations. The night brought dreams that seemed more real than waking consciousness, visions of possible futures that revealed the profound significance of decisions that appeared deceptively simple on the surface. Rebecca saw her daughter growing strong and wise, connected to both ancient traditions and contemporary knowledge, serving as a bridge between worlds that had grown too far apart. But she also saw the challenges that would face a child marked by special circumstances, the difficulties of living with gifts that most people couldn't understand or accept. The dawn of their 6th day in the canyon arrived with crystalline clarity that seemed to illuminate more than just the physical landscape. Rebecca woke with a sense of certainty that had been building throughout their extended stay, a conviction about the path forward that came from deep listening to inner wisdom rather than external pressure. The choice between staying and leaving had resolved itself into something much more fundamental, a decision about what kind of life she wanted to create for herself and her daughter. The baby stirred in her arms, opening eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the ages despite their few days of existence. Rebecca looked down at her daughter and felt the weight of destiny settling around them, both like a cloak woven from starlight and ancient dreams. The decisions she made in the coming hours would shape not just their immediate future, but the entire trajectory of a life that had begun in sacred space, under the protection of forces beyond ordinary understanding. The canyon walls rose around them like guardian spirits, their ancient stone faces, bearing witness to the moment of choice that would determine whether mother and child would remain connected to the healing power of this sacred place or return to a world that might never fully understand the miracle they had witnessed. The morning light painted everything in shades of gold and promise, waiting for Rebecca to step forward into whatever future she chose to create. The Canyon Bride. The morning of decision arrived with a silence so profound it seemed to hold its breath along with everyone gathered in the sacred canyon. Rebecca sat at the edge of the ceremonial circle, her daughter nursing contentedly while the assembled group of medical professionals, tribal elders, and friends waited for the choice that would determine not just their immediate future, but the entire trajectory of a life that had begun under such extraordinary circumstances. The baby's eyes remained open during feeding, dark and alert, as if she too understood the significance of this moment, when her mother would choose between two completely different paths forward. Alina Crowfeather approached with the measured steps of someone carrying profound responsibility. The tribal elder's face bore the weight of visions that had visited her during the night, dreams that revealed possible futures stretching out like branching paths through time. Her weathered hands held a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin, a gift that would mark the culmination of ceremonies that had been building throughout their time in the canyon. The old woman's presence commanded absolute attention from everyone present, her spiritual authority transcending cultural boundaries and professional hierarchies. Dr. Walking Bear stood ready with medical equipment and transport arrangements that would ensure safe passage to the nearest hospital if Rebecca chose to leave. His own bicultural background had given him unique insight into the spiritual dimensions of their situation, but his professional obligations required him to advocate for conventional medical care, despite the remarkable healing that had taken place in the canyon. The tension between these competing perspectives was evident in his expression as he waited for Rebecca's decision. Robert Flying Eagle maintained his position near the sacred fire, his ancient eyes reflecting knowledge that went beyond mere medical or even spiritual considerations, to encompass truths about destiny and purpose that most people spent lifetimes trying to understand. The old man had become more than just a healer during their time together, evolving into something approaching a prophet whose words carried the weight of generations of accumulated wisdom. His presence anchored the entire gathering in traditions that connected them to forces larger than individual choice or contemporary convenience. Jennifer remained at Rebecca's side, her loyalty unwavering despite the extraordinary nature of the decision they faced together. The friend who had entered the canyon as a bridesmaid had been transformed by their shared experience into something deeper and more permanent, a sister chosen rather than born, bound by trials that had revealed character in ways that ordinary friendship rarely demanded. Her willingness to support whatever choice Rebecca made spoke to bonds that transcended mere personal preference to encompass genuine love and commitment. Thomas and Maria flanked the gathering like protective guardians, their own transformations evident in the quiet confidence they had discovered during the crisis. The uncle who had revealed unexpected leadership qualities and the cousin, whose medical knowledge had proven invaluable, had both found aspects of themselves they hadn't known existed. Their presence provided stability and continuity that would endure regardless of the path Rebecca chose, a reminder that family bonds could survive and strengthen under the most challenging circumstances. The baby finished nursing and settled against Rebecca's chest with a contented sigh that seemed to express satisfaction with her world despite its unconventional nature. Her tiny fingers grasped the woven grass bracelet that marked her as a child of the canyon, a connection to sacred space that would remain with her regardless of where she spent her childhood. The physical bond between mother and child had deepened during their extended stay in this healing environment, strengthened by circumstances that required complete mutual dependence and trust. Elena began to speak, her voice carrying across the canyon with the resonance of someone accustomed to addressing spiritual gatherings in sacred spaces. Her words were directed primarily to Rebecca, but they encompassed everyone present in their scope and implications. The elder spoke of choices that appeared simple on the surface, but carried consequences that would ripple through generations. Decisions that connected individual lives to larger patterns of meaning and purpose that most people never recognized or acknowledged. The gift Elena carried was revealed to be a cradle board crafted by skilled hands from materials gathered in the canyon itself. The wooden frame was carved with symbols that told the story of the child's birth, while the soft wrappings bore the colors and patterns associated with children born under special circumstances. This was not just a practical item for carrying an infant, but a spiritual artifact that would connect the baby to her birthplace regardless of where life eventually took her. Rebecca accepted the cradle board with trembling hands, understanding that this gift represented more than mere craftsmanship or cultural tradition. It was a tangible link to her heritage, a bridge between the ancient ways and contemporary life that would help her daughter navigate the challenges of growing up, marked by extraordinary beginnings. The weight of the wooden frame felt substantial and reassuring, a physical reminder of spiritual realities that could be easily forgotten in the rush of modern existence. The decision crystallized in Rebecca's mind with the sudden clarity that comes when all the competing voices finally fall silent and inner wisdom speaks with unmistakable authority. She looked around at the faces of those who had supported her through the darkest and most transformative period of her life, understanding that whatever choice she made would honor the bonds they had forged together in sacred space. The canyon had given them all gifts that would endure regardless of geographical location or practical circumstances. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried the strength of someone who had discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known existed. The words came not from fear or desperation, but from deep listening to truths that went beyond rational calculation to encompass spiritual understanding of her daughter's needs and destiny. She had made her choice not by weighing pros and cons, but by recognizing what her heart had known since the moment her daughter drew her first breath in this sacred place. Rebecca announced her decision to remain in the canyon for another week, long enough to complete the healing process that had begun with her daughter's dramatic birth, but not so long as to ignore the practical necessities of life in the contemporary world. This compromise honored both the spiritual significance of their experience and the reality that her daughter would need access to educational opportunities and medical care that could only be found outside this isolated sanctuary. The response to her decision revealed the wisdom of her choice in the relief and approval that crossed the faces of everyone present. Dr. Walking Bear nodded with professional satisfaction, understanding that the additional time would allow for complete physical recovery while ensuring access to emergency medical care if complications arose. Elena smiled with the deep contentment of someone whose visions had been confirmed by reality, while Robert's weathered features reflected approval of a choice that honored both spiritual and practical considerations. Jennifer's tears were ones of joy rather than sadness, her own transformation during their time in the canyon making her understand the importance of completing the healing process that had brought them all together. The friend who had feared losing Rebecca to some mystical calling now recognized that the choice to eventually leave represented strength rather than abandonment of newly discovered truths. Their friendship had been tested by extraordinary circumstances and emerged deeper and more authentic than either had previously experienced. The extended family members who had supported them through crisis accepted Rebecca's decision with the understanding that comes from witnessing transformation firsthand. Thomas and Maria had both been changed by their experience in the canyon, their own spiritual growth making them appreciate the complexity of the choice Rebecca faced. Their willingness to support whatever decision she made spoke to family bonds that had been strengthened rather than strained by the challenges they had overcome together. The medical team began preparations for maintaining their extended presence in the canyon, understanding that their patients' remarkable recovery made conventional hospitalization unnecessary, while still requiring professional oversight during the final stages of healing. Dr. Walking Bear's bicultural perspective had given him unique insight into the value of traditional healing environments, and his advocacy ensured that Rebecca's choice would be supported by appropriate medical backup and emergency procedures. The tribal elders conducted a final ceremony to mark the transition from crisis to conscious choice, their rituals acknowledging that the emergency phase of their situation had ended and a new chapter was beginning. Elena's blessing encompassed not just Rebecca and her daughter, but everyone who had participated in the healing process, recognizing that they had all been changed by their experience of supporting new life under extraordinary circumstances. The baby slept peacefully in her new cradle board, the woven materials providing comfort and security that seemed to satisfy needs she couldn't yet articulate. Her presence had been the catalyst for everything that had transpired in the canyon. Her premature birth, forcing a group of strangers to become a community united by shared purpose and mutual care. The child who had entered the world abandoned by her father had instead found herself surrounded by chosen family whose bonds would endure for the rest of her life. The additional week in the canyon passed with the gentle rhythm of natural healing and gradual preparation for return to conventional life. Rebecca's strength continued to improve under Robert's traditional care, while her daughter gained weight and developed the robust health that would serve her well in the world beyond their sacred sanctuary. The time allowed for emotional processing of their extraordinary experience and practical planning for the challenges that would inevitably arise when they rejoined mainstream society. Jennifer used the extended time to make arrangements for supporting Rebecca's transition back to independence, her loyalty expressing itself in practical ways that would ease the immediate challenges of single motherhood. The friend who had witnessed miracles was now determined to ensure that the mundane realities of contemporary life didn't overwhelm the spiritual insights that had been gained through their shared ordeal. Her transformation from wedding guest to chosen sister was complete and permanent. The legal proceedings against David had continued in their absence, with authorities building a case that would hold him accountable for the calculated cruelty of his abandonment. But Rebecca found that her anger toward him had been transformed during their time in the canyon into something approaching pity for a man whose wounded pride had led him to commit acts that revealed the poverty of his character. Her daughter's father had lost the opportunity to know an extraordinary child, a loss that was entirely his own making. Thomas and Maria had both taken extended leave from their regular responsibilities to support Rebecca through her transition, their own priorities permanently altered by their experience of participating in something larger than individual concerns. The crisis had revealed leadership qualities and depths of character that would influence their choices for the rest of their lives, transforming them from passive family members into active participants in creating the kind of community that could nurture exceptional children under challenging circumstances. Robert's teachings during their final days in the canyon focused on practical wisdom that would help Rebecca maintain her connection to traditional ways while navigating the complexities of contemporary life. The old man's guidance encompassed everything from child-rearing practices rooted in ancient tradition to strategies for protecting her daughter from the pressures and temptations that would inevitably arise as she grew older. His words carried the weight of 8 decades of experience in bridging different worlds. Elena's final consultation addressed the long-term implications of raising a child marked by extraordinary beginnings, offering guidance that would prove invaluable in the years to come. The tribal elder spoke of the importance of maintaining connections to sacred places and traditional practices while still allowing the child to develop her own relationship with contemporary culture. The balance between honoring heritage and embracing innovation would be one of the central challenges of their future together. The morning of their departure arrived with bittersweet clarity, bringing both sadness at leaving their sanctuary and excitement about beginning the next chapter of their lives together. Rebecca dressed her daughter in clothes that had been blessed by traditional ceremonies while packing the modern necessities that would ease their transition back to conventional life. The cradle board would travel with them, maintaining their connection to sacred space regardless of geographical location. The journey out of the canyon was carefully orchestrated by the medical team, with every precaution taken to ensure the safety of both patients during the challenging climb to the rim. Rebecca's strength had returned sufficiently to manage the hike with assistance, while her daughter traveled securely in the ceremonial cradle board that marked her as a child blessed by ancient spirits. The ascent was slow but steady, each step carrying them closer to the world that waited beyond their sanctuary. The transition back to conventional life proved less jarring than expected, partly because of the careful preparation that had taken place during their extended stay in the canyon, but mostly because of the spiritual foundation that had been established through their extraordinary experience. Rebecca's apartment had been maintained by friends who understood the significance of what had transpired, creating a welcoming environment that honored both practical needs and the sacred nature of their homecoming. The baby adapted to conventional surroundings with remarkable ease, her early weeks in the canyon having given her a flexibility and resilience that would serve her well throughout life. The child who had been born in sacred space under the most challenging circumstances seemed to carry within her a deep confidence that no external circumstances could shake. Her presence continued to attract attention from sensitive individuals who recognized something special about her energy and awareness. Rebecca's recovery continued under the joint care of traditional healers and contemporary medical professionals, an integration of approaches that honored both her heritage and the realities of modern life. The healing that had begun in the canyon was completed in more conventional surroundings, but the spiritual foundation remained intact, providing strength and guidance that would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The community that had formed around mother and child during their time in the canyon maintained its connections despite geographical separation, creating a chosen family that would provide support and encouragement throughout the years to come. Jennifer's role as honorary aunt was formalized through legal arrangements that would ensure continuity of care if anything happened to Rebecca, while Thomas and Maria's involvement provided stability and practical support that complemented the spiritual guidance offered by Robert and Elena months later. As Rebecca watched her daughter playing in the sunlight that streamed through their apartment windows, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and contentment. The child who had been abandoned by her biological father before birth had instead found herself surrounded by chosen family whose love was deeper and more reliable than mere blood relationships. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating at the time had become the catalyst for discovering strength and wisdom that might never have emerged under conventional circumstances. The daughter who had been born in sacred space continued to display the special awareness that Elena had predicted, her development marked by insights and sensitivities that suggested connections to spiritual realities beyond ordinary perception. Rebecca found herself serving as interpreter between her daughter's exceptional gifts and a world that wasn't always equipped to understand or appreciate them, a role that required constant learning and adaptation, but provided profound satisfaction and purpose. The canyon remained a powerful presence in their lives despite physical distance, its healing energy accessible through memory and ritual that maintained their connection to sacred space. Annual pilgrimages would become part of their family tradition, opportunities to renew their bonds with the place that had given them both new life and deeper understanding of their place in the larger patterns of existence. Years would pass before Rebecca fully understood the gifts that had emerged from what initially appeared to be the worst betrayal imaginable. But the foundation had been laid during those transformative days in Cedar Canyon when a community of strangers had become family and a premature birth had become a miracle that changed everyone who witnessed it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.